Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I'm obliged to my colleague from Bain and Grantstown who stood down to allow me to do this because I've got some other thing that calls me away. But I would like to have some input into today's debate. First, I want to express my concern for my friend and colleague and former High Commissioner to the United Kingdom, Ed Bethell, who is not doing well at this time. Friends have gathered around, and we express our thoughts and prayers with his wife and family. He has served on two very public occasions for our country, both in the Broadcasting Corporation as a journalist and a leader in television and radio, and later as a diplomat serving in New York and in the United Kingdom. I would also like to, so I commend Ed Bethell to your thoughts and prayers and to all members of the House and across the country. Secondly, the 20th of February would have been the 96th birthday of Sidney Poitier, who's the Bahamian actor who won the Academy Award in 1964 for Lilies of the Field and was a groundbreaking actor. We showed the film Sidney in Fox Hill on a couple of days ago for the community there, a film which was done by Oprah Winfrey. And community turned out extraordinary response to it. I spoke to his wife, Joanna, last week on his birthday, and since then his daughters have reached out as well to repeat again the expressions of gratitude for a life well lived, a great Bahamian who's done well. I would like to remember at this time also Sheena Burrows, who is a constituent of Fox Hill, who passed away, and also Essie Ferguson, who I've boasted many times in this place, probably has the best chicken recipe I know. And I've taken many of my colleagues there to taste it. She passed away, and there's going to be a huge funeral in Fox Hill on Saturday. So I express my condolences to the family. And I'd like, though, to dedicate what I have to say today and my view about the way finances operate to a woman named Norma Heald, who is from Roll Avenue. I met her during the time when George Mackey was the Minister of Housing, and I was on the outside proselytizing for one cause or the next. And you happen in these relationships in politics to meet people, and they go with you throughout the rest of your life, and she is one of those. She's working laterally at the Parliamentary Commissioner's Office. But I mentioned Oprah Winfrey. Oprah Winfrey was on television one day, and she said she was giving advice to people, financial advice to people. And she said, you know, the best advice I could give you is always pay the full balance of your credit card at the end of the month.
It's a great idea.
And I said, you know, if you're worth $2 billion, that's easy for you to say. But, you know, I know Norma. She was able to raise, I think, 5 children, the last of which was blind as a result of some issues in the hospital. He was born as a preemie, separated from a husband. And I watched her find every means possible to get money to make ends meet at the end of the month. And you know, the view is if Commonwealth Bank called you up and said, look, here's a credit card with another $5,000, you better take that because you need the money. So that sort of guides my philosophy with these financial things. Necessity dictates most things. And you know, people obsess about debt and deficits and spending, but what is a developing country to do? The now Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies was pointing out when the British handed these countries over to us, there was severe underdevelopment in these countries. So 90% of the people, I think Jamaica had a literacy rate of 10% when they got independence in 1962, if I'm not mistaken, or pretty close to it. So the first thing the government had to do when they became the government, and similarly with us in 1967 when we took over, is you had to spend in education. You had to invest, and how else are you going to do it if you don't have the cash generated. You got to borrow. And so you try and manage and do the best you can because the country has to develop, people have to feed their children, the place has to grow. And no sense obsessing about it because there's no other choice with this. Necessity dictates what happens. So, I thought that I would start off condolences to her family on her passing and saying that's a lesson which I abstracted from my relationship with her. And I want to say, too, Ms. Deputy, that when you are the lion in winter, sometimes, your roar is not good enough. And often you got to bite back. And there's a friend of mine named Charles Roll who passed away a long time ago. He used to run a club in Plantal Street, owned by Ina Hepburn, called Mama Deuce. And he used to tell me that when running the club, that every 6 weeks or so, he had to haul off and punch somebody in the club to make sure that the club would be calm for the next 6 weeks. So that's also instructive in how life operates. That people think, seems to me, that you get to a certain stage that you're a punching bag for everything. They just get up and say whatever they feel like saying, and you're not supposed to answer them back. Cecil Wallace Whitfield said when he was here, came back from his cancer treatment, he said, I'm at the stage now where I'm not going to attack anybody, but if you attack me, I'm going to defend myself. That's been an axiom of my existence, political existence. So I start with those sort of philosophical principles, and then we'll see. And then I met Mr. Deputy Speaker, well, one of them I haven't yet met, but certainly know that she was born, and I'll give their names, Tiana, Skylar, Dakari, and a little boy named Chosen. And these are the next generation of Bahamians. Chosen, I guess, is about maybe 2 or 3 now. And Tiana, Skylar, Dakari, they've just been born within the last year. And I hope for them, out of all the things that we do in this budget, that we are creating for them the same thing that my parents bequeathed to me. I wish for them, and tens of thousands of others in this country, to leave them a thriving, well-run, economic and environmentally sustainable liberal democracy, tolerant, violence-free, free of hatred, and free of discrimination. So that's what I wish starting off today. And I remember watching Chosen with his mother, who sadly passed away. I guess he was about 3 or 4 months when I first met him. And we had gone to his home to visit his father's backyard farm. And so the father brought him back inside. And I watched her talking to this little boy at 3 months and watching him interact with her. And it just suddenly occurred to me, even at that early age, that parents influence their children. And you have a responsibility, those who are fortunate enough to be parents, to guide your children from the earliest stages in the values that I just talked about. And I encourage parents, that's why Sandlands Primary School is a primary focus for me, because I feel that if you give them the right start, that they will go on to be healthy and productive citizens, and to help them all along the way in this task. And I don't envy the job that the Minister of Education has to do. It's a tough job, but I commend all the work that she's doing and the allocations that have been given to her in this budget, so that we can have these successful citizens. The citizenship of our country was defined back in 1972. And I remember at the time being given a ride by Darrell Roll, the late Darrell Roll, in his car. He was taking me from the Dorchester Hotel, where he's living in London, in 1972, to the train station, and he was going back to Marlborough House. And he told me that at the time that the government had settled the citizenship provisions for the new Constitution, and this would resolve, they thought, once and for all, the question of migration and the then threat which people felt of our culture being overtaken from the South. Of course, we now know, 50 years later, the problem is still with us, and in many respects has been made worse because of the problems associated with an underclass that has grown up because we've been unable to process citizenship applications on a timely basis as a result of it. So that is part of what we face today, now trying to resolve what is going on in Haiti and our relations with us. Philosophically, though, I describe myself in this phase as being second fiddle, not first fiddle. In other words, you have prime ministers. I've served, this is the third time I've served in this job, and each prime minister in each term has had a view of what foreign policy is. And the British, although they left primus inter pares as a thing that they taught us, meaning first among equals, in fact, what has evolved, and when you look at our Constitution, we really are a presidential system in disguise. Because when you look at Articles 112 and 1111 of the Constitution, you know for sure that the Prime Minister is actually the designer, the progenitor of foreign policy in the country. And I wanted to say off the side to my honorable friend from the other side as the leader of the opposition, when he engages in this forensic enthusiasm about what's being spent on travel, that, you know, if you want this job one day, and I'm trying my best to make you keep your current job, but if you want this job one day, if you want this job one day, take it from me. Read Article 111 and 112 of the Constitution, and I think you should become less enthusiastic about this forensic examination of what's going on. Perry Christie once told Lyndon Pindling, when he was exercising his choices about senators as leader of the opposition, he said, you know, why would you surrender a power which the Constitution gives you? Keep the power. If the Constitution gives it to you, keep the power. I just advise you, for those who have designs. I leave that to you. I think I've said enough. I've said enough. Now, you know, I do say this though, notwithstanding the episcopal position of a prime minister in these positions. I did speak once to the Roman Catholic Archbishop here in the Bahamas, and I said, you know, as Archbishop, you know, you can do what you want. You can just order priests. He says, well, yes, in theory, that works, but in practice, that's not what happens. So I also advise you on that. But my second point about being second fiddle is the responsibility then of the foreign ministry is, in a sense, to lead from behind and not to get out in front of the prime minister's views about foreign policy. And the prime minister is very much engaged in foreign policy. You know that climate change, Haiti, energy security, and food security are very much top of his international agenda. So my admonition to Foreign Service officers is try as much as possible, keep the Foreign Service out of the news. Keep it out of the news and out of the gossip columns. When you work overseas, go to work 9 to 5. The Public Holidays Act says what the hours of government offices are, right? You're supposed to work from 9 to 5, open 9:30 to 4:30, and that applies to foreign officers as well. That is what our obligation is in law to the public. You're not on holiday because you have been given a job overseas. And to conduct your private and public lives in such a way as to bring credit to the country. The other point I make is that the permanent secretary is the head of the Foreign Service. Even though the minister is the policy decider, so to speak, and ultimately I can give directions, decisions in the Foreign Service are to be channeled and funneled through the permanent secretary. Loftus Roca, who was remains my good friend, and you know, I used to spend many mornings with him in his office, once told me, you know, even as a minister, if you call some public servant below and say, do X, the next thing when the minister gives that direction, hang up the phone. The public servant is supposed to call the permanent secretary and say, look, The minister just called me and said X, Y, and Z. What do I do? Because the accountability to the country is through the permanent secretary. And I think that all in our lives, that is why things were constructed that way, so that there is a buffer between you, the policymaker, and the politician, and the public purse. It is your ultimate protection. And this also applies, the minister was talking yesterday about the whole issue of collective responsibility, which is, again, one of these conventions of the Constitution of the British bequeathed to us, but which is now enshrined in the law in our country. So the permanent secretary is also the chief accounting officer. And I'll come back to this accounting issue as well. So we have a system which is constructed in this way, and the minister's main job is a policy job, and we have done our best to make sure that this system works properly. I think no one can fault us on the Progressive Liberal Party side on the way the system actually works. I would like to say a matter about the policy within CARICOM. You know that we've said that CARICOM is the main thrust or focus of our policy. And within CARICOM, we have some specific interests. One, obviously, is Haiti, where we have a very complex problem. And the Roman Catholic Archbishop, again, I saw him at a function, and I asked him the other day why the church has not been more forthright in seeking to tamp down the issues that are being whipped up, which may lead to violence and discord in our society over these immigration matters. Even though, you heard the minister speak yesterday, there is a careful balance that has to be struck in this country about what we are saying and how evocative we are being so that it does not lead to discord in the society. And we cannot get the reputation of a country that is engaged in this kind of talk which leads to intolerance and discrimination. The fact is, there are 400,000 Bahamians. There are 7 million people who come here every year. We do not have the labor. That's as plain as day. We do not have the labor to be able to service the 7 million people. And so one of the issues that we have to face is how is our immigration policy going to be managed? The people who have been caught on these boats in the thousands are trying to get to the United States of America. And so we can talk ourselves into a crisis. We can talk ourselves into a crisis, or we can have faith in our institutions. And our institutions are functioning and functioning well and doing the work which they're called upon to do. So this brings in that's on the domestic side. So this brings in then the question of our international partners. And some people have criticized us for saying this: why are we going down to Haiti? We can't solve Haiti's problems. The issue is not about solving Haiti's problems. What we have to do is, first, we have to know what's going on down there. Secondly, we have to be able to anticipate, as a result, what the issues are going to be. And thirdly, we have to try, since we have these values, to see if we can work with the elites and others in their system to try and bring about some form of stability. And two things came out of the very important meeting which the ministers led with the Jamaican Prime Minister a couple of days ago. And that is, one is the view that the Haitian National Police will get the support which it requires from the international community. This includes armored carriers, this includes additional weapons, this includes training. And the CARICOM countries have significantly given pledges of trying to do from that support side. We're not talking about boots on the ground. And secondly, we ought to know that notwithstanding Haiti's position as the poorest country in the region, these are very proud people. And no one wants you to come in their country and tell them what to do. So you can't do that anyway. And the Haitian Prime Minister, when he was here, spoke to his colleagues and apologized to his colleagues for two things: for the problems which ensue in this hemisphere as a result of the poverty and deprivation in Haiti, and secondly, for the refugee issue. I think many of them are very embarrassed that this is a problem that they can't resolve and solve. So it is in our interest to help resolve this issue, and that's why we are engaged. Secondly, with regard to the dependent territories in CARICOM, there are three in particular that we have an interest in: Bermuda, the British Virgin Islands, and the Turks and Caicos Islands. They are what the British used to call the Northern Caribbean territories, and they are still dependent. And there was a lady named Dr. Suma, who was from St. Lucia, used to be the Secretary General of the ACS, and she made a point on Bermuda radio a couple of weeks ago. She said, as long as the independence project is not done, self-determination is not done in the Caribbean, as long as one country is not free, we still have a job to do in our region. So our country is interested in ensuring that the internal democracy in these countries, we can't determine for them whether they become independent or not. That's a separate issue. They are associate members of CARICOM, but our position is to assist them, support them in making sure that their internal democracy succeeds. And we made it plain to the British when they suspended and imposed direct rule in the Turks and Caicos Islands that we did not support it, And we've said the same thing with regard to BVI, and the position is now. Thankfully, they've not done so in BVI. And of course, we've had a long-standing relationship with the people of Bermuda. At one point, there was a UBP in Bermuda and a PLP. There's still a PLP today. So there was the Front Street Boys in Bermuda, the Bay Street Boys in Nassau. And they have both interacted with one another. And it's only an hour and 50 minutes up the road. And of course, the reason why the Turks and Caicos Islands is not with us today because Bermuda businessmen ran the salt trade in the Turks and Caicos Islands and said, look, we have to break away from Bahamas. So they're not part of the Bahamas. And you know that Grand Bahama was built in part, the pine was reaped in part by people from the Turks and Caicos Islands. And there are large gatherings of people from the Turks and Caicos Islands in Grand Bahama and throughout our country. So in fact, the independence project of this country, because they could have voted here in 1967, majority rule, and they did the independence project. All of those were done and supported by some of these very people now that some miscreants are whipping up hysteria about. So our country was in fact built by the help and assistance of so many people from outside the country. And that is why we continue to have this interest in internal democracy. Ralph Gonsalves, Prime Minister of St. Vincent, said this at a meeting, that it's fine, since they're dependent territories, for the imperial power to say, well, we are running a well-oiled ship, and you know, but what you see in the British Virgin Islands, he said, is the success of the 40,000 people of the British and Virgin Islands, not the British, the people of the British Virgin Islands built the society that they have, so that they should be allowed to run their democracy until such time as they consider it appropriate to move to another stage. So we'll be hosting a conference with them shortly, the three territories, to talk about their issues, quite apart from their presentations at the Committee on 24 at the United Nations. So that is the value proposition which the Bahamas also brings to the CARICOM project. Now, to move away for that for a minute, on the question of finances. When I became minister this time, I asked for a meeting with the financial secretary. And I said to him, the blueprint of the Progressive Liberal Party says we want to do this, 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 and this. Does the Ministry of Finance have the wherewithal and the money to support the programs of the Progressive Liberal Party in this blueprint? I said, yes, the programs of the government will be financed because those are the programs of the government. After that, I don't need to have any more conversation with the Ministry of Finance. That's my job no more. If you say the money is there, my job is to carry out the policies of the government. And with those who are saying about when the Bahamas government cannot afford for its officers, members, and to go anywhere, we'll stay home. But our job is to carry out the mandate of the Progressive Liberal Party insofar as foreign policy is concerned. And that is what we do. The permanent secretary guards the public purse. We don't do anything unless that is managed through that channel. And at one point, you haven't named a shadow cabinet, but the last time I had a relationship with the then shadow minister, who was able to come and view whatever was going on in the ministry. I said, fine, there's nothing to hide here. There's nothing to hide here. And that's been my basic philosophy. It's public monies. We spend the public monies wisely, judiciously. We don't waste it, but we have to carry out the objectives of the government and the policies and programs of the government. And that's what we will do. And, you know, Michael Manley used to say, look, not left or right, not without a backward glance, carry out your policies. Now, what the issues we all face, and again, these are general governance issues, and that is how, again, Manley talked about why his own regime was not able to carry out the programs 1972, 1977, 1977 to 1980. And he described it as the weight of change by the political directorate. The public administration simply could not support the pace of change. And that's what we face as a country, is how do we get the execution of the things we want with an impatient public who's telling you, look, you promised to do this, it's 15 months now, why can't it be done? And you say, the Public Service Commission, the this, the that, the that, the that, the that. They ain't hearing that. That's the public on the one side. But the point is, the real situation all of us face is how does the public service, the public administration, let me put it more properly, execute the policies of the government in a timely fashion. It takes manpower, it takes training, and I've said also there is nothing that I've seen in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas that's a problem that can't be solved by money, which comes back to how do we get money? Two things, productivity, taxes have to be paid, have to be collected. And I know it's great to be in opposition and play both sides. You know, if you impose the tax, you say you're taxing the people too much. If you don't put the tax, you say you ain't collecting the taxes, and you have, you know, great, both worlds. But there needs to be some public education about the issue of paying taxes. There was a study done when I was a public service minister, 2002, 2007. And the IDB said that when they did a tour of the place, of business people, they discovered that people did not see the connection between paying their taxes and the services delivered by government. So that still obtains today. We have to show that in order for the math teacher to be in Crooked Island, in order for the roads to get paved, we have to collect taxes, as unfortunate as that is, and that there's an obligation as citizens, a duty to do so. So I thank you. I commend this mid-year statement. Prime Minister's doing a good job, and we continue to support him in foreign policy to the best of our ability and in the public service. Thank you.
The chair recognizes the honourable member from Marco City.
One that the minister would share with us whether or not his meeting with the FX was in his capacity as the Minister of Public Service and the Foreign Affairs, or as the chairman of the PLP seeking out the blueprint.
You know, I'll answer it this way. Shakespeare had a saying. He said, "Mischief thou art afoot."
That's what it's for, yeah. Put it on the notices.
The chair recognizes the honourable member from Kanata.